Hello, welcome back to the Jet Press Podcast. My name is Justin Fried, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend, Mike Luciano. Mike, let's ignore the little restream bug that we just had there, the technical issues to start this show. How are you feeling, my friend? We are a couple weeks into the new year, and the head coach and GM search for the Jets is extensive. They promised it would be extensive. It has been, I believe, combined between the GM and head coach candidates, including Jeff Ulbrich. They've had 33 candidates, to my knowledge.
For the head coach.
I think it's 16 and 17. Very extensive. They are casting a wide net, whatever buzzword you want to throw out there. How are you feeling today, buddy? What's going on?
Feeling pretty good, aside from Restream deciding to, instead of making a stream to go live here, they made a completely different stream with a completely different name at a completely different time than we wanted. But I don't want to anger Restream too much because it'll probably end up screwing up more stuff if I get mad at it. So I'm going to go leave that be. Thank you for tuning in because we got a busy week in Jets land. We have a head coaching search. We got a GM search. I believe the GM search will get done before the head coaching search. I think that could give us some insight into what exactly is going to happen right here. We got some news on Aaron Glenn specifically, who's been long talked about as a Jets target for head coach. And checking in with some old friends. It's weird to call Robert Saleh an old friend, but we got some Robert Saleh news that we are going to discuss. Thank you guys for tuning in. You know where to find us on the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Overcast. We are there. And you can find us on YouTube. You can support the show in two ways. You can pay 99 cents and you can join our membership. 99 cents a month. You get priority reply in the chat and a little star badge next to your name. And if you want to support the show for free, just hit subscribe. Pretty easy. Just boop, subscribe. There you go. Doesn't cost you a dime. Supporting the show, help us make more content. Before we get started, too, Justin has another interview with Jets punter Thomas Morstead, who is a very good friend of the show. That'll be going up around 4 o'clock on the Jet Press YouTube page. So please, we urge you to check that out. A lot of good stuff in there about Rodgers this season. Greg Zuerlein, finally get some answers there on what the hell happened with him.
Yep. Asked him about the Saleh firing, which we'll talk about Robert Saleh in a bit. Got Morstead's thoughts on what the locker room vibe was like after Saleh was fired. Asked him about Aaron Rodgers' future. Like you said, what was going on with Greg Zuerlein. Good time. Always fun talking with Thomas. Like you said, friend of the show. Might as well be the third member of our podcast at this point. So be sure to check that out. 4 p.m. Eastern time. That goes live.
Let's go and talk about some hires and some fires that could potentially happen with the Jets in the coming days. We'll start with the GM search. And this is kind of all over the place because it is hard to figure out, A, which GM candidates are in the lead and which GM candidates are going to be good. Like, good example, before we get into one topic I really want to talk about, everybody is mentioning a guy named Alec Halaby, who's the assistant general manager for the Eagles, as a guy that, he's really sharp and really cutting edge. He could be great for the Jets. Quite literally, that is exactly what Joe Douglas said. I think people maybe memory hold this. People don't remember how universally praised the Jets were for hiring Joe Douglas. So after that, it's tough for me to get excited about any particular executive, even if they're from a good organization, because I don't know what they were doing. How do I know what he did instead of Howie Roseman? How do I know what Mike Borgonzi did instead of Brett Veach in Kansas City? So I get that. One name that has popped up, unfortunately, and I want to get Justin's opinion on this, is Ryan Grigson. And that name is poison to my ears because Ryan Grigson was the GM with the Colts for about 5 or 6 years. When they had Andrew Luck was his first year, 2012. He literally, I went back through all of his drafts, and I found he has exactly 3 good draft picks. One of them was Andrew Luck. I barely even give him credit for because everybody was going to take Andrew Luck. Mm-hmm. Other than him, T.Y. Hilton, Ryan Kelly. In literally 6 years of drafting. Justin, do you know what's important about Kobe Fleener?
He was a tight end that Grigson drafted in the 3rd round.
He was the 4th best player, in my opinion, that Ryan Grigson drafted.
Yeah. And I look, Kobe Fleener was fine. He also drafted Dwayne Allen in that draft. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
That's how Bjorn Werner
was, dude.
Philip Dorsett.
Bjorn Werner and Philip Dorsett, back-to-back first-round picks, has got to be as bad as, other than like the Raiders run of Damon Arnett and Henry Ruggs, guys who didn't even play for the team. It's about as bad as you're going to get.
DJ Green, 2nd round, LaRaven Clark, Jack Newhart, Dante Moncrief, Hugh Thornton. Guys that were so bad. Andrew Luck, one of the best prospects we've ever seen, as John says, Grigson, meh, dude can't draft. It was so bad. He retired at 29 because his kidneys were lacerated and he lost his passion for football. That's how bad Ryan Grigson is. He has gotten a second chance, I guess. He's one of the top guys with the Minnesota Vikings. I believe he's a director of player personnel. Why is his name important? Well, the Jets have interviewed him only because there were some rumors that if Brian Flores, Minnesota's defensive coordinator, comes to the Jets, which has been mentioned often, like if Aaron Glenn does not come, then Brian Flores seems like he's very firmly the number 2 guy right now. They do like Brian Flores. The interview in person this week, now the Vikings are eliminated. It seems like Flores wants to come to the Jets. He will bring Josh McCown as his offensive coordinator. So you can essentially get 2 head coach candidates in one because McCown will be your offensive coordinator, which might be better for him at this stage of his career. You're thinking jackpot. You're thinking jackpot. Mm-hmm. Flores also, allegedly, this is all rumors, wants Ryan Grigson to be his general manager. And I want to get Justin Bigums P. Powell, which is a fantastic name, says, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to pair GM head coach, or is the GM going to hire the head coach? It'd probably be a package deal in that regard.
It's kind of a mix of both. Like, they're going to hire the GM before the head coach. The GM hire, if I had to guess, I think it'll happen early next week. I think by this time next week when we're doing our Wednesday show, I think the Jets will have their new GM, or knowing our luck, it'll probably happen right after we finish recording.
I hope it's not Ryan Grigson.
I think it'll happen in one of those first few days of next week, and then they will begin the second round of head coach interviews. But they are talking to these GMs and these head coaches in this first round of interviews, and they already have an idea of, okay, if we hire this guy, who are we likely bringing in as the head coach? And if we hire this guy, who are we bringing in as the GM? So it's kind of a mix of both. They're going to hire the GM first, and technically that GM will help them hire the head coach, but they're probably already going to have a good idea. As far as Ryan Grigson goes.
The question I wanted to ask, though, Justin, was, would you be willing to – are you that into Flores and McCown together, you'd be willing to accept Grigson as a general manager?
It definitely puts a damper on things, for sure. And I think I would have other – like, I would prefer Aaron Glenn in that situation. I probably already prefer Aaron Glenn over Brian Flores, and it sounds like the Jets might as well, or at least Aaron Glenn prefers the Jets, which we'll talk about him more in a moment. But – yeah, I don't think I'll say this. I think based on what I'm seeing, the Grigson, Flores, McCown trio is more Grigson attaching his name than Flores attaching Griggs' name for him. I think that's
Jet more hire Grigson, that's his plan.
Yeah, that's what
Flores demanding, hey, this is who I want.
I don't think Brian Flores is like, I'm not going to be the head coach of New York Jets if you don't hire Ryan Grigson. I don't think that's what the situation is. Ryan Grigson, by the way, is currently the senior vice president of player personnel. So he's not even the number 2 under the Vikings GM. I believe he's probably number 3 or so. They've been trying to do this like media tour to kind of rehabilitate his image. And it's funny because I feel like Ryan Grigson has one of the most misleading, just if you look at his resume, it looks really good. He never had a losing record in 5 years in Indianapolis. Worst he finished was 8-8. He won 3 playoff games, went 11-5 3 straight years. You'd think the guy was a good GM. That's a really good resume for any executive. Unfortunately, the context is he had Andrew Luck, who Andrew Luck at that time was one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL, probably for the majority of that time. And unfortunately,
and as a draft prospect, I don't even want to give him credit for that because we thought people were tanking for Trevor Lawrence. I mean, it was twice that.
It's like
anybody. My grandmother would have taken Andrew Luck.
Correct. It's like giving the Spurs credit for drafting Victor Wembanyama first overall. Like, no, they were giving the Cavs credit for drafting LeBron James. Like, this was the obvious choice. They were always going to draft Andrew Luck, of course.
No one even entertained an argument to the contrary.
Correct. And Ryan Grigson failed to build a roster around Andrew Luck, failed to build a competent Colts team, and did not capitalize on that window. Not only did he not capitalize on Andrew Luck's window, you can ask any Colts fan, they will be the first to tell you he actively ruined Andrew Luck's career. If anybody who was watching football at that time remembers the offensive line discourse around Andrew Luck and that team, that's all Ryan Grigson. That is a failure to build an offensive line around him. The only good offensive lineman that he drafted was Ryan Kelly, and that was, I believe, his last draft with the team in 2018 or whatever. 2016.
And then he had TJ Green in the second round.
Right. That was his last draft. There were 2 players, Mike, under Ryan Grigson's tenure past his first draft, so past that Luck and T.Y. Hilton draft, which is great. But I also should point out that anytime you have a new general manager coming in, and this is going to be the case with the Jets right now, when the Jets bring in their new regime, their new GM, they're carrying over a lot of the scouting work from the previous regime because a lot of times the scouts will stay there. So whoever the Jets have as their scouts right now, like those the guys who are sleeping in vans in the regional scouts, like those guys, they're not necessarily going to be fired when the Jets clean house. Like those guys are usually sticking around. And so the dirty work that they're doing is kind of going to be inherited by the next regime. And that's kind of what happened with Ryan Grigson's first year in Indianapolis. Sure, he took over for who was the GM before? Scott, was it what's his name? Scott Pioli, was that the GM before that? I think
in Indy.
Yeah, am I correct in saying that?
I don't think it was Bill
Scott
Polian.
It was not Scott Pioli. I'm forgetting his name. You know what I'm talking about? What?
Bill Polian.
Bill Polian. That's yes. I mixed up Polian. Yeah, you got it. That he inherited that scouting department essentially, and so yeah, you can credit him for finding T.Y. Hilton in the third round, but also the fact that his best draft was his first draft, which he didn't even do a lot of the legwork for that draft. I don't think that says a lot. There were two players that were drafted by Ryan Grigson post 2012, post that first draft, that received a second contract with the Colts. One of which was Ryan Kelly, who was a very good center in the NFL for a while. And the second was Clayton Gathers, who was a fringe starting safety, signed a 1 year, like $2.6 million contract.
He was more like a special teamer than anything.
He was barely a starter. Those are the only two players that received a second contract that was drafted by Ryan Grigson during that time. That Bjorn Werner draft, that Philip Dorsett draft, there's basically nothing. And on top of that, we haven't even mentioned, Mike, he didn't have a first round pick in 2014 because you know what?
He traded it for Trent Richardson.
He traded it for Trent Richardson, that's one of
the worst trades ever.
It is because he was not good.
Now the Browns took, I believe, Johnny Manziel with that pick. So it didn't help anybody, but yeah.
In 3 consecutive drafts, he drafted Bjorn Werner first round, traded his first round pick for a guy who averaged 3 yards per carry and was out of the league in a year and a half. And then Philip Dorsett. That was his trio of first round picks in between Luck and in between Ryan Kelly, his last draft. The only even semi-good pick, Gathers in the 4th round, fine, sure. He also drafted in 2015 Jets legend Henry Anderson in the 3rd round, who Anderson didn't do shit with Indianapolis. He had his best years with the Jets. Very, very poor drafter, despite what his record would indicate. I have no interest in him as Jets GM. If you're going to go the retread route, a guy who's already done it, why not someone like Thomas Dimitroff, who has a much better track record? Or even, I don't think a Ray Farmer is probably a serious candidate.
Ray Farmer picked Johnny Manziel and Justin Gilbert.
Yeah, I don't necessarily love Ray Farmer as a candidate anyway, but I'd much rather significantly other candidates. And like you mentioned, like it's really hard for us to evaluate GM candidates because we don't know the ins and outs of what they specifically do inside of our organization. I can't tell you what Mike Borgonzi is doing with the Chiefs. All I can say is that he's highly regarded and he's the number 2 under Brett Veach. And that's probably a good thing, unless maybe you're Ryan Poles, which has kind of been inconsistent. But I can tell you that Ryan Grigson was a bad general manager with the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe he's learned. Maybe he's better off for it. It's been 8 years or whatever since he was a GM. I'd still rather take a swing on someone else.
Looking at the candidates the Jets have interviewed right now, again, I think we're both in agreement because you look at these names, there are at least 5 of them now that are basically the number 2 to successful teams. Trey Brown, Cincinnati, Lance Newmark in Washington, Darren Mogi, I believe is how you say his name, in Denver. Guys like that. Mike Greenberg from Tampa.
Brian Grain in Buffalo is also.
Brian Dane in Buffalo, who would basically be, again, Joe Shane was highly regarded. What do we think of Joe Shane now? That was what Joe Shane did before. This is tough. This stuff's tough. There are 2 names that I think really would excite me, honestly, with the Jets. Number 1, obviously, we mentioned before, is Dimitroff, because you're not going to get very few GMs are available on the market that have his level of success and are not involved with the team. And literally, if God level, the heavens fell down and everything broke apart in front, if that comeback doesn't happen, he's built a Super Bowl winner. Atlanta won all the time when he was there. Maybe they left some meat on the bone, but my God, do the Jets ever need a floor raiser? I trust Thomas Dimitroff more than however many of these assistant GMs who are 35. I don't know if they're doing cap stuff. I don't know if they're drafting. I don't know if they're looking at free agents. I trust Dimitroff because he did it for such a long time. And one name that I actually thought was kind of interesting, and it gives me kind of a parallel to a successful team Woody Johnson likes. is Chris Spielman. Now, I made some jokes about Chris Spielman, and some other people did, because his brother, Rick Spielman, who used to be the Vikings, who honestly would not be if they hired him, I wouldn't be like too mad about it. He was pretty okay.
How funny would that be if Rick Spielman was like, all right, we found our best candidate. It's me.
It's the old Dick Cheney thing where he set up a big like firm to consult on who should be the vice president pick that year. And he goes, you know what? I interviewed like 15 people and I decided I'm the best.
Yeah, it would be that. And then Mike Tannenbaum comes on as like assistant GM or VP of player.
Yeah. So Chris Spielman is the quote, here's the position, special assistant to the owner and CEO with the Lions. He's been there since 2020. Now, he was a fantastic player with the Lions. He made 4 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pro teams. He's on their all-time team. A great player, great linebacker, Chris Spielman. If they bring him in, I think he's a super smart guy. He was a broadcaster for a very long time. Obviously, his brother Rick, I think, may help a little bit. I think Rick Spielman knows a little bit about football.
Yeah.
He reminds me when the 49ers hired John Lynch, where John Lynch, I don't think, had any front office experience.
I don't think so either.
When they hired him, he was straight out of the broadcast booth, and they gave him the keys to everything.
It was very outside the box, and a lot of people hated it at the time, but he's done a really good job.
And you know what? Because you know what? Stanford guy, great player, smart guy. He just knew football. He figured it out. Spielman, if we want to poach guys from Detroit, because Ray Agnew has not been interviewed, John Dorsey has not been interviewed, I would not be opposed to Chris Spielman. It's a little unorthodox, but orthodox was Joe Douglas.
They haven't been interviewed by anyone, have they? Dorsey and
no, they haven't.
Wow.
Which is weird to me.
Yeah, because everyone was talking Agnew was a top candidate. Dorsey, the question was, does he want to be a GM? Because he's already done it a few times now.
Perhaps to me, maybe the league is saying, all right, we know Brad Holmes does everything over there. Maybe that's what I'm getting at. I don't know.
But then Spielman is getting.
Well, Spielman's getting it because of his brother, I think. But
probably, yeah.
I don't think it would be a crazy idea. I think he's certainly knowledgeable. Why not Chris Spielman?
That's our buddy's Still Curtain podcast. Tommy over there does a great job. Assistant to the regional manager. Yes, that's Chris Spielman, essentially. That's an Office reference, Mike. You got. Have you seen The Office, Mike?
I'm not a fan of the.
Wow.
I've only seen a couple episodes. I've laughed the times I've watched it, but then
it's a good show.
The fans are like Rick and Morty fans, where they're so rabid it like turns me against the product. I'm like, okay, calm down. It's not that funny.
It's got too big of a following for its own good, I think. It's a really good show. Like, I really enjoy it. My hot take, I don't know if it's a hot take, I enjoy Parks and Recs more.
I've not seen any episodes of that.
I really like Parks and Recs. They're both good shows. But anyway.
I only watch old episodes of the Jimmy Durante show from the 50s.
Buddy, we live very
entertainment I consume.
We live very different lives. John says David Shaw is my number one. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's tough to say of the candidates that are known where they have like a background that we can actually evaluate. Thomas Dimitroff did an excellent job as Falcons general manager. Obviously, drafted Matt Ryan, drafted Julio Jones, built a consistent winner, or at least a consistent, decent to above average team for 8 years or whatever. No, he was there for like 12 years or so. He was there for a long time. So Dimitroff, I like. Of the other guys, Borgonzi has gotten a lot of high praise around the league. He has a scouting background, has also done some stuff on football ops. He's been in Kansas City for a while. Has only been in Kansas City. So I guess that's like not a concern, but it's always like a little pause where it's like, okay, he only knows how to do it this one way. And obviously the other pause there is Ryan Poles was basically Brett Veach's number 2. He was the number 2 in Kansas City before he got hired, and is done an okay job in Chicago, I guess you could say, is the generous way of saying it. And then there's Alec Hallaby, like you mentioned. The difference between Hallaby and Douglas, while they're both the number 2 under Howie Roseman in Philly, they're very different backgrounds. Douglas was more scouting background, obviously came from the Ravens organization, so it's not like he was only with the Eagles. He was a personnel scout for a long time. He was on
Hard Knocks.
He was.
He was the inaugural Hard Knocks.
He was doing the dirty work. Like when you imagine a scout working their way up through the ranks on minimum salary, eating McDonald's every day, like that was Joe Douglas. That's what he was doing. Hallaby is a very different background. It's more analytics. He started as an intern with Philly, was a player personnel analyst, and then he kind of worked his way up to his current role as assistant GM pretty quickly, I might add. So they're different backgrounds, similar concept where they come from the same organization. Then there's someone like a John Eric Sullivan, who he's another guy with a scouting background. I believe he was a director of college scouting before his current role, which is the VP of player personnel. Again,
Green Bay drafts pretty well typically.
Green Bay is drafted very well. Again, with these GM searches, you'll find it that every team just kind of looks for the good organizations and tries to hire the guys who are second or third in command in those organizations. It's really difficult to get insight into exactly what they do. I believe John Eric Sullivan, the little anecdote, I think it was Albert Breer that said it, was that John Eric Sullivan was the scout at the time who recommended Jordan Love, who kind of put Jordan Love on the map for the Packers. So that is an interesting.
I don't know if after that playoff game, if that's a compliment or not.
All right, he's still Jordan. I would take Jordan Love as the New York Jets quarterback in a heartbeat. So I think that's a positive there. But again, those anecdotes are few and far between. There's a lot of that information doesn't always come out. It's probably going to be stuff that we find out more about after these guys are hired, where it's like, okay, the Jets hired Mike Borgonzi. Let's find out now that he was the guy who wanted them to draft Chris Jones. Like, something along those lines. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see who it ends up being. Right now, all we know, Jeremy Fowler, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler reported that Borgonzi is a strong candidate for the Jets job. My guess, if I had to guess right now, Mike, and I'll ask you too, if you had to guess, I'm saying GM head coach pairing. I'm going to be optimistic right now. I'm feeling good about this search, better than I was a week ago. I think in an optimistic world, the Jets hire Aaron Glenn as head coach and Mike Borgonzi as GM. I think that's a pairing that I've seen thrown around quite a bit. There's no obvious candidate for GM unless it's Chris Spielman. If they bring in Glenn, I don't think they're going to go the Spielman route. I don't think that would be a good look, considering Rick is the one running the show, and I don't think anyone else has interviewed Chris Spielman. So I don't think they would go that route. The not downside, but the pause I have with that is I know the Jets are prioritizing experience a lot, and they've been wanting experienced candidates. I just think if Glenn knocks it out of the park in his second interview and Borgonzi knocks it out of the park, I don't think that's a prerequisite. I think that's a preference, but not a prerequisite. So that'd be my guess. But if you had to predict right now, Mike, who do you think GM head coach? Who do you think it's going to be?
I like Mike Greenberg in Tampa Bay.
Okay,
a lot of smoke there.
Long Island native,
Long Island guy, Tampa. Yeah. I'm afraid of getting guys because of John Idzik that are like the cap guys and the money guys.
Sure,
those guys worry me a little bit.
Are you afraid of scouting guys because of Joe Douglas? Are you afraid of scouting guys? Mike McCagnon also has a scouting background.
I'd rather take a swing and miss on those guys.
I agree.
Because again, I feel like they had a couple picks that Idzik gave you nothing.
Who's isn't the Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah? Isn't he a cap guy?
I think he was.
Yeah, he was a cap guy, I believe. So it could work. He's obviously
honestly, I've talked myself onto this podcast. This is gonna sound crazy.
Oh boy!
Why not just look at Rick Spielman?
Oh boy!
Why not? Right? Like, look at his resume. It's not bad, is it?
No, it's not. I don't think they're going to. But I
don't think they will either. But like, if we're talking about Dimitroff and we're holding him in this high regard, I mean, didn't Spielman do very similar things?
Yeah, I guess.
Made the playoffs basically, like 6 times with the Vikings?
A good question from Marcelo Cabrera said, would you prefer having Dimitrov and then ask him which head coach he wants, having Glenn and asking him to help the GM, or have both of them and hope it works? So prefer Dimitrov and ask him which head coach he wants.
Do you want Dimitrov hired first to pick the coach, or Glenn hired his input on the GM?
I think they're going to do is they're going to hire the GM first. Yes. I would be very surprised if they hired a head coach.
Joe Grana says Lance Newmark, who's the assistant in Washington. That'd be good too. He was with the Lions for like 20 years before he went to Washington too. So.
That makes sense to me. Again, most of these we're to be on board with, unless it's a Ryan Grigson or like it's easier for us. It's the exact opposite of the head coach search, where it's like, oh, there's not a lot of candidates we like. I think with the GM thing, it's a lot. There's not a lot of candidates we actively dislike. Grigson is in that list. I think Louis Riddick probably is in that list for me.
Jim Nagy.
Jim Nagy for sure is in that list. Riddick, I'm just like, I have no idea what he is, and he has not worked in an NFL front office in over a decade. It would be
neither did Lynch. Was the same thing.
Correct, and you don't know. I'm just saying, of the available candidates, he's probably less qualified than some of the other guys that we're talking about, whether it's whoever else. But I don't know. There's not a lot of guys I actively hate as a GM candidate.
Let's talk coaches.
Sure.
Because there have been a lot of guys mentioned in this coaching search. 17 have been interviewed, including some puzzling name. Mike Loxley, Darren Rizzi, Rex Ryan. Like what? Brian Greasy. What are we doing here?
Joe Witt was out of nowhere.
Joe Witt. Yeah, Joe Witt.
the Patriots have already hired a head coach. Teams are bringing in coaches for second interviews, and the Jets are still adding new names to their coaching list.
Yeah, you're like, and part of me is like, oh, they're being thorough, and part of me is like, do you even know what you want?
Yeah.
If you're at, if you have a job, I know it's a weird thing to say, oh, they should interview exactly 8 people. That's the right amount of people to interview for this job, but it's one thing to be the Patriots where you want one guy, you have 2 sham interviews.
Yeah.
That they didn't even pretend to give them a real shot. Pep Hamilton, Byron Leftwich, Ben Johnson, just in case he blows us away, and then you hire Vrabel. I don't think that's the way to do it. I also don't think the way to do it is to hire so many people that Mike Loxley ends up getting an interview. As Brian Sternbeck says, let me know which day Arthur Smith is set to come so I can block the doors. Tomorrow.
I believe it's tomorrow, yeah.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Interview for the Bears today, it's tomorrow. So if you live in and around the Florham Park area,
don't let Arthur Smith go in.
Maybe intercept no, that sounds bad. Don't hurt him, but just lock the doors.
I've actually revised that tier list. I'm a little higher on Nagy than Arthur Smith at this point now.
They're still in the same tier for me. Yeah. I hate them both. I would not like either. Fun exercise. Where would you put? So who has been added since we did that head coach tier list? Joe Witt. Is that it? Is it just Joe Witt?
Mike Loxley is in super mega F tier.
Let me check the handy Jets head coach tracker on the Jet Press that you can check out now. It is fully updated. Yeah, Mike Loxley and Joe Witt are the only ones added. Mike Loxley might be in U tier with Jeff Ulbrich.
And then Joe Witt, I had Arthur Smith at the top of C tier, and I put Witt in C ahead of him.
Yeah, I guess
the top of it.
I guess it's so weird.
I was asking around with some people that are more around Washington and Dallas. They all spoke extremely high. They all love him. So.
Yeah. I mean, he's gotten rave reviews. It's just, it feels.
They called him a, quote, old school guy. So.
It feels early for him. He literally just got a DC job this year. He was a passing game coordinator for a while with a few different teams. It definitely feels very early. I don't think that it almost feels like when the Jets interviewed Aaron Glenn when they hired Saleh. Like that was kind of that. It was like, this feels early for Aaron Glenn. But now, maybe give him a couple.
I think this may have just been a favor because they interviewed Lance Newmark, who's Washington. It's like, let me get my guy an interview.
Sure.
Nothing. But looking at this, though, one of the guys high on the list was Aaron Glenn.
Absolutely.
And I think we had him no lower than, 4th on our list of.
Yeah, he was A tier. He was A tier for sure.
He was A. And then Mike Vrabel's gone. So our top 3 now are Flores, Glenn, and Joe Brady, who I don't think Joe Brady's coming here.
Which sucks. I think Joe Brady we actually had number 1.
And then they're like,
more. But I'm surprised there's not more buzz around Joe Brady around the NFL. Like,
maybe they think he's too young. He's only 35.
Dave Canales got a job last year. I think Joe Brady's more qualified than Dave Canales, and I was high on Dave Canales. I mean, granted, I think the Panthers were the only team to even interview Canales. But I'm surprised there's not like a lot of buzz around Brady. I don't think.
For a while, I thought he'd go to the Saints, but McCarthy coming in there too. But getting back to the Saints and Aaron Glenn, the nerves for them basically started because there were all these reports, and if you look at all kinds of odds wherever in America and offshore, a lot of them have Glenn as the co-favorite for both the Jets job and the Saints job. Now, Glenn, of course, played with the Jets for 8 years. He got to start as a scout with the Jets. But he was also a defensive backs coach under Sean Payton for a couple of years. I think 5 years, actually, with New Orleans. And it seems like it was going to be a choice of one of those two. And it was up to him. Who do you like better, New Orleans or New York? And it surprised us because not as like Jets homers. We're the farthest thing from Jets homers. We're like, do you really think New Orleans is a better job?
Yeah.
I mean, they have a better quarterback, but weak division. The AFC East is a weak division right now. New England and Miami aren't particularly scary. You have Buffalo, but the other two aren't that scary. You get some money to play around with. Ownership is very committed to trying to win. Like, I don't know why you go to New Orleans, but it seemed like that was the pick. And then Brian Costello comes out with a report. Now, Brian Costello was the Matt Nagy guy a couple months ago who really spooked us.
Predicted Matt Nagy, yep.
But he said if it came down to it, you had to pick between the Jets or the Saints, Aaron Glenn would pick the Jets.
That's what he did.
Which I'm excited about. Now, I want to get to a comment from Marcelo Cabrera because this goes into my point that I wanted to make. What do you think about the argument that Glenn equals Saleh? That's both why I'm excited about Aaron Glenn and why I'm nervous about Aaron Glenn. you could copy paste everything everybody said about Saleh, who was regarded as a pretty solid hire by everybody when the Jets hired him. You could copy paste that for Aaron Glenn. Everybody loves him. Defensive guy, sharp, winning organization, motivator, like to a T. Now, if you like Saleh and think he got a raw deal, I think me and Justin will admit, even though he had some losses, he did kind of get a little bit of a raw deal in terms of the quarterbacks he was given. If you like Saleh, you're going to like Aaron Glenn. If you don't like Saleh, I don't think you're going to like Aaron Glenn. My other concern with Aaron Glenn is everybody keeps saying, well, he gets to poach that Detroit offensive staff for his OC and stuff like that. Well, if Ben Johnson gets a job, who do you think they're going with? Him or Ben Johnson?
And Ben Johnson will get a job.
Ben Johnson assuredly is getting a job.
Yeah.
Maybe with the Raiders, which is crazy tampering Tom Brady. I don't know how they're allowing that, but they are, because it's Tom Brady and he can do whatever he wants, I guess. So if Ben Johnson gets a job and he loses, like maybe a quarterback's coach or a receivers coach you could have brought with him, like Mark Brunell, that would have been a nice OC for the Jets. Bring old Mark Brunell back.
Yeah,
he's probably going with Ben Johnson. Maybe he takes Sean Payton guys he knew from Denver, New Orleans. I mean, it's not going to be as rich a staff as I thought it would be. So those are my two concerns. Too similar to Saleh. I don't know what offensive staff he's bringing in. But my God, everything else looks aces in terms of what you want as a coach. And again, I know it's Saleh rehash, but defense is performing with not great personnel. I mean, everybody's hurt, and they're still cooking up some pretty good defenses. Fiery guy. Guys love him. He does seem more committed to being good on offense than Saleh did. Like he had a quote the other day, you're not hiring a defensive coach, you're hiring a coach, which I like that mindset. Aaron Glenn has kind of warmed on me, and not just because it's looking more like that's the guy they're going to hire, but he just seems like a guy where you can't predict the future. But everything that I've seen in the present and the past makes it seem like he's going to be a knockout head coach. And then you get a guy who was with a Jet for so long. When they were good, he knows what it means to this fan base, for this city, for this team to be good. Like, he's the kind of guy you want in there. Like, I don't know how they could look at Aaron Glenn and look at Arthur Smith, probably a good offensive coach, like he's a good coordinator. I don't know how they can look at those two and say these are equal candidates in our mind. I don't know how they can do that because Glenn is far above him for me.
And I don't think they do. I don't think they look at them as equal candidates. You stole my lead, by the way. I was going to read that quote before you even brought it up. I'll still read it. I'll read the full quote. This was Aaron Glenn speaking at a press conference the other day about, I believe it was like answering concerns about how he's a DC or whatever. He goes, I'm a coach. I just happen to be on defense. I understand the offense just as well as a number of people. If you hire me, you're going to hire a coach, not a defensive coach. I'm going to talk to the offense just as much as I'm going to talk to the defense. And I will say this about the Saleh Glenn comparisons. That was largely a criticism of Robert Saleh, was that he focused too much on defense, not as much on offense throughout his Jets tenure. It really wasn't until this year, unless I'm wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it really wasn't until this year that Saleh made it a point of emphasis to say, hey, I'm not just a defensive guy. I'm going to focus on the offense more. And obviously words are just words.
I tried a little bit like early when Wilson was like really bad early on. He's like, I'm going to get more hands-on. But he also kind of ruined that because remember he brought in his quarterback coach and a bunch of other guys. They had like 5 people telling him what to do, and they overloaded him.
And they had Matt Cavanaugh in there. They had too many cooks in the kitchen.
I do feel bad for him too because his whole plan was, well, Greg Knapp is going to coach up Zach Wilson. And then Greg Knapp unfortunately dies before he even gets to basically, coach Zach Wilson. I mean, that immediately threw a wrench in his whole plan.
The whole rookie year of development for Zach Wilson could not have gone worse. It was a disastrous situation, both from what they can control and what they couldn't control. Everything went poorly. But yeah, I love that quote from Aaron Glenn. And again, words are just words. We don't know what's actually going to happen. And I think the OC thing is totally fair because looking at that Lions staff, I haven't heard a ton about a lot of these guys. I mean, Tanner Engstrand is the passing game coordinator. There's a good chance he would follow Ben Johnson to his next role. Mark Brunell, I mean, he's been the quarterback's coach there since 2021. I don't know if he's ready for an OC job. I mean, granted, we're saying
a lot of these guys, like that's their first job of this level was when Dan Campbell, Antoine Randall is the receivers coach. I think JT Barrett's there too.
Yeah, it's even the
Sean
defense.
Dion Hamilton, who's like our age, is one of their linebackers coaches.
Calvin Shepard, who played in the NFL, there's a ton of former players. Some of the guys that I grew up watching.
Scotty Montgomery, who was a bad college coach at East Carolina, he's their assistant.
He's their assistant head coach and running backs coach. So yeah, there's not a ton of guys in that staff where I'm like, oh, this is obviously the guy.
Rex Ryan's son.
When the Jets hired Saleh, it was very clear there was a couple of guys there, LaFleur, and then I'm blanking on who the run game coordinator was at that time, because I believe LaFleur was the passing game coordinator. There were two guys.
One of the Embrys.
Taylor Embry, maybe? So 49ers 2020 staff. I'll look it up. But it was very clear at that time. It was like, okay, they're going to hire one of these guys. It was Mike McDaniel. It was Mike McDaniel. There you go.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I knew it was somebody notable. It was Mike LaFleur and then Mike McDaniel. The Jets hired Mike LaFleur. Mike McDaniel stayed in San Francisco until obviously he was hired by the Miami Dolphins. But yeah, there's not really that obvious candidate with Aaron Glenn. So that's a fair red flag. He's still one of my favorite candidates. And it does sound like he's a very strong candidate for the Jets job. I would say a week ago when we were talking about this, I was expressing a little bit more pessimism because kind of the reading the tea leaves, the reports out there suggested that Glenn might have been leaning Saints, and that if it was between the Jets and the Saints, that Glenn was more likely to go to New Orleans. Brian Costello's report directly refutes that. So
somebody's wrong. Somebody's really wrong here.
And I'll point this out too, and this is like an important media literacy thing. Brian Costello specifically said he's not hearing that from the Jets. The Jets are not, because obviously if the Jets are like, oh yeah, Glenn prefers us, they're probably going to say that. He said specifically, the Jets are not the ones who said that. I've talked to people around the league. I believe it was around the league is what he said. And he said that, yes, that's where he's getting this information from, that it's not the Jets telling him that information. And I thought that was very notable as well. I'm going to try and find the exact quote. But yeah, it does seem like Glenn would prefer the Jets right now. The other guy, of course, that is still in this discussion is Brian Flores, who is the current Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator. I'd still be happy with Flores, less happy, as we talked about before, with Grigson as GM, a lot less happy, but you can't go wrong with a Flores-McCown pairing. And at least with Flores, you have a good idea of who the OC is going to be, because it's not like there's another guy in Minnesota that's getting hired as a head coach job. I don't think that McCown has received another head coach interview than with the Jets. So I think that
only the Jets
shows. Yeah, and I think that also shows how interested they are in Flores, because if they're willing to bring in McCown for a head coach interview, one, that's probably doing a favor to a guy who still has a lot of friends in that building. But two, it shows like, hey, look, we want to talk to you, because even if we don't hire you as head coach, we are very interested in you as an offensive coordinator option. So I think both are still very much on the table. I would not be surprised if either is the next Jets head coach. Right now, leaning Glenn. I'm just hoping it's one of those two, because again, my fear is the fallback is still Arthur Smith or Matt Nagy. And I believe it was Dan Graziano of ESPN who yesterday predicted that Arthur Smith would be the Jets head coach. So I do think that's still a possibility, even if it's something that we all don't want to be something that comes true.
Keep your eye on this guy for possible offensive coordinator for Aaron Glenn, Pete Carmichael.
Oh, the New Orleans guy. Yeah.
He was the OC with the Saints for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Sean Payton called the plays the entire time. So he only called the plays the last 2 years when he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Mixed results, obviously. He's a senior offensive assistant with Denver right now. But I feel like if Glenn doesn't get a lot of his Detroit guys, because Ben Johnson takes him, because Ben Johnson's only basically known the Lions in his pro coaching career. Yeah. I think Glenn's got a bigger Rolodex in terms of contacts. I feel like he can get some New Orleans guys or some Denver guys. Maybe some of Vance Joseph's assistants in Denver. That's probably why they brought in Vance Joseph, get some intel on them.
Yeah.
That's where I feel like he kind of beefs up this staff.
What about Dennis Allen, DC?
He's probably an okay defensive coach. I can't even say that because the Saints defense this year I don't think was that good.
He's interviewing for, he was the head coach, though.
He's a 4-down lineman guy, too, I think, like hardcore.
Yeah. I'm just throwing it out there as an experienced DC option if they don't want to put everything on Aaron Glenn's, on his shoulders. I mean, if not him, they maybe bring in somebody from that Lions staff. I don't know. I was just throwing that out there as I saw he got a DC job somewhere else earlier, or a DC interview, I should say.
Andy Rivera has hired Glenn already. Well, they can't until the season's over for the Lions.
Right. And they're not going to hire another head coach at the earliest possible time. I think it'd be like next weekend at the absolute earliest. And I think it's going to be probably more so the week after that. They're going to probably hire a GM next week. I imagine earlier in the week, more so than later.
If they really want Glenn, they'll wait on him.
Yeah. And then they're going to do their second round of head coach interviews. And yeah, if they have to wait on Glenn to bring him in person for an interview, they will.
Well, he already did that because he had the bye.
Oh, they brought him in person for that.
I think he was in person. Didn't he go to Florida for that?
Maybe. I thought that was virtual. I don't know. I forget.
Yeah. And then Richard Jones, you have to assume the Vikings defense looking mediocre in the past 2 weeks plays a role. Well, against the Lions, I don't think they were mediocre.
And you also, as we'll talk
and again, against the Rams, they gave up, 20 points? Because one was a defensive touchdown.
Yeah.
It's not it's okay.
And as we'll talk about, they didn't exactly receive great quarterback play in those 2 games.
And again, the other thing, too, is, unless Aaron Glenn wins the Super Bowl and shuts everybody out, of course they're going to say, oh, the defense played bad. You got to –
yeah.
Unless he wins the Super Bowl, they're probably going to lose a game. And then they're going to say, well, the defense let him down here. We can't hire Aaron Glenn. Like that, I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that. You got to look at the whole body of work.
Correct.
Especially with Glenn playing with just a skeleton crew. You didn't have Aiden Hutchinson or a lot of his – he just got Alex Anzalone back. Not a lot of his big players here.
It's amazing they've been as good as they have been this year.
Yeah.
All the personnel absences they've had.
And he switched up stuff. Like Saleh, one of the critical things of him was, again, that scheme when it worked was damn near unbeatable sometimes. He never adjusted it.
Yeah.
And I get it because he's like, it worked before, it's going to work again. And sometimes it did. But Aaron Glenn has mixed up a lot of stuff defensively. Brian Flores, I think he's been a little more rigid. It's like, I'm either blitzing or dropping 8. And,
yes, he is. Expect a lot of blitzing if they hire Brian Flores.
And a lot of dropping 8. It's just you don't know when he's going to do which.
Yep.
That's the chess game you play with him.
Yep.
Let's talk about our old coach.
Sure.
Old coach Robert Saleh. Because I thought he was just going to get a DC job because nobody doubts his defensive ability. Because everybody loves him as defensive coach. He has gotten not 1 head coaching interview, but 3. There are 6 non-Jets coaching interviews or coaching vacancies that you could interview for, excuse me. And he's going to interview for 3 of them. The Raiders are one, which surprised me a little bit. That's a tough-ass job. And that division, that owner, that quarterback situation, I do not envy whoever takes that job.
Raiders would shock me. I don't think he's going there.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to the Raiders.
Sounds like Ben Johnson might be going
especially
there.
After Antonio Pierce. I think they might want to switch it up for Antonio Pierce. I feel like Saleh's kind of the same sort of mold. The Jaguars, who Robert Saleh was their linebackers coach before he went to San Francisco as the defensive coordinator. Supposedly they love him in the building. I just don't know how many people in that building are there that were there when he was there.
Yeah, that was the Gus Bradley years.
That was the Gus Bradley years. I mean, are you going to hire him because he made Myles Jack and Paul Posluszny look pretty good?
Hey, Myles Jack.
Know.
What about remember Telvin Smith?
Didn't something bad happen with him?
Yeah, he did something.
He did something bad, I remember.
He retired young or whatever. He was taking time off for mental health, but then it came out.
He never came back, and then he did something bad where he
Google it. Yeah, he did something.
It's not good.
Some stuff I'm not going to repeat on the podcast.
Yeah, it's not
he
good.
Did some bad stuff.
So there was the Jaguars, which could be appealing for him because they have Trevor Lawrence and they have Brian Thomas, and it's just we got our offense, just fix that defense. And then the Cowboys. He's their first actual name that they put down. Not just they might hire Deion Sanders. The first actual name they put down, we're going to interview this guy is Robert Saleh. Which, again, I think could be interesting for him because they got Dak, they got CeeDee Lamb. That offense can run pretty much whoever you bring in. Get a Shanahan guy, maybe LaFleur again, I don't know. And then you just work on turning Trayvon Diggs into Sauce Gardner, letting Micah Parsons go crazy. And then you probably win 10 games, I think. You can win 10 games that easily.
Oh, yeah.
With that Dallas roster. So that's appealing. The takeaway I have from this is that this is a bad look for Woody Johnson above all else. Because we have been trying to divvy up the blame pie for last year and writ large the entire failure of the Jets with the Aaron Rodgers experiment. How much of it's Rodgers, how much of it's Joe Douglas, how much of it's Robert Saleh, how much of it's Woody Johnson. The league is seemingly saying Saleh does not get a ton of blame for this because they're saying even though you were 20-36 was your overall record, you never won more than 7 games in a season, you never won a playoff game, and your quarterback play was terrible. We don't think you're at fault, Saleh, because you had to deal with Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, Mike White, that whole menagerie of quarterbacks. You had to deal with Aaron Rodgers getting hurt immediately and then being good but not Aaron Rodgers good once he got back. You had to deal with Joe Douglas drafting outside of that 1 year, which I think was more of a fluke now than showing his acumen. I think you had to deal with a GM that didn't get you the appropriate talent. Malachi Corley, 3rd-round pick. And you had to deal with a crazy impulsive owner, Woody Johnson. Now, again, you want to talk about impulsive, meddling owners. I don't think Jerry Jones is much of a step down from Woody Johnson. He's probably a step up. But I think that's telling me that the league is saying, you know what, Robert Saleh, we believe in you as a coach, and we think he got screwed by the Jets, by Woody Johnson, by whatever. So much so that we're not – forget being a DC, because he'll get a DC job if he doesn't get a head coaching
job. He's got that 49ers DC job lined up.
Like, if he doesn't get a head coaching job, he's going to go there.
Correct.
They pretty much have said that. They're saying we're willing to make you a head coach immediately again. That's how much we like you. With teams that are at pivotal inflection points that cannot afford to screw this up. Cowboys, Jaguars. They're saying that's how much we believe in you, Robert Saleh. Just get away from Woody Johnson and you'll thrive. That was my big takeaway from Saleh getting these interviews.
My takeaway is kind of similar, but it's more so about Jeff Ulbrich. My takeaway is that
poor guy, man. We just rip on him deservedly, but geez.
As I've said before, seems like a wonderful guy. Everybody that I've talked to says wonderful things about him. Thomas Morris said in the interview had only great things to say about Jeff Ulbrich and how he has kept the locker room together. Whatever, players love him. He's a cool dude. The coaching job that he did with the Jets was one of the worst coaching jobs that I've ever seen an interim coach do, and that's saying a lot because we've seen some bad ones. I mean, probably not like Jeff Saturday levels bad because that was just like, what the hell are they doing? It was really bad. I think Jeff Ulbrich is a worse head coach with the Jets than Adam Gase was. Maybe not as bad as Coach Hite. It's hard for me to say because
Adam Gase won 7 games with a horrible roster.
Adam Gase won 7 games with a horrible roster. He won 10 games in Miami, made a playoff game in Miami. Jeff Ulbrich is not doing any of that. Absolutely not. Especially he had a decent roster and he was lucky to go 3-9. I think that the horrific coaching job that Jeff Ulbrich did and how disastrous the Jets organization was after Robert Saleh was fired has done more to improve his stock than anything Saleh did with the Jets over the last 3.5 years. That is my takeaway from this situation is that Robert Saleh, I think if Ulbrich did a fine job and it was basically the same, if the Jets were relatively 500 and basically the same after Saleh was fired, I don't think Saleh gets a head coach job this cycle. And I don't think he should take a head coach job, but that's a different conversation. I think because Ulbrich was so bad at his job, NFL teams got to look at how bad things could be, and it almost boosted Saleh's stock. Especially look at the defense, Mike. We've harped on this before. The Jets were 5th in EPA per play under Robert Saleh over the first 5 weeks of the season. They had a top 5 defense. Under Jeff Ulbrich, 30th in EPA per play from week 6 to week 18.
I don't even know how you do. Like, how does it go? They didn't go 5th to 19th. Yeah. You go 5th to 30th. And if you count the last 2 years, 2022, 2023, success rate, they had the best. EPA per dropback, I think they were 3rd.
Yeah.
And then they went to 30th. Like, how do you do that?
Ranked pass defense in EPA per dropback over the last, whatever, it's from week 16 to week 18 after Saleh was fired. I don't know how it's possible when you have Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, and I mean, Michael Carter was barely even playing. He was hurt. But when you have a team that should be, like they have the personnel to be a very good pass defense, I don't know how you rank 30th. I think because of that, teams are looking at Saleh and saying, well, hold on a second. Maybe he wasn't so bad. And maybe he wasn't the biggest problem. Now, I think we can sit here objectively as people who have watched Robert Saleh's coaching career with the Jets and say that I don't think he was a particularly good head coach with the Jets. I don't think he was as bad as maybe some records would indicate, or like obviously he was given a raw deal. He was given an overbearing owner who constantly and continuously stripped him of power over the last couple of years. He wasn't done a ton of favors by his GM, but I also think the roster was not bad. He was not given a good quarterback. He had 5 games of Aaron Rodgers, 2 or 3 of which Rodgers actually played all right, and that was it. That was the extent of good quarterback play that Robert Saleh received. So, I think all that's true. I still don't think he was a particularly good head coach. I think there were obviously a lot of issues with the Jets consistently falling flat in big games, consistently stumbling out of the gate and getting off to slow starts. There were issues with Robert Saleh's coaching. And because of that, I don't think it'd be good for him to take a head coach job. I've been saying this. I think it'd be best for him right now to take a year or 2 off, be the DC in San Francisco, be back in a familiar situation, a familiar environment. You got a good roster there. Hopefully everyone's going to be healthy next year. You have the best linebacker in football in Fred Warner. Like, you got a really good team. You have obviously Kyle Shanahan as your offensive coach, so you know that there's a floor with your offense. It's always going to be good. It's never going to be bad with Kyle Shanahan as your offensive coordinator, or as your head coach, I should say. I think that'd be best for him. Take those 2 years or 1 or 2 years and then become a head coach again. I think that would be best. I think he needs that time, kind of learn a few things. Maybe, honestly, probably better to not go to San Francisco, but he's going to go to San Francisco. I think that'd be better for him, because if not, he's going to jump right back into a head coaching job, probably in Jacksonville. I think is the most likely landing spot, it seems, at this point, which is a weird hire for them. I know he's loved there, but it would be, I would much rather go with a guy like Liam Cohen to build around Trevor Lawrence than Robert Saleh. But I don't know. Maybe they don't want an offensive guy because Peterson failed. I don't know what Shad Khan is thinking behind that mustache.
I don't know who. Maybe Saleh would be willing to put up with.
That's maybe. Well, they didn't cross paths in San Francisco, I don't believe. I think they were off by a year.
No, they didn't.
But they both know the 49ers organization very well, and they also.
I'm saying, like, Ben Johnson, Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know if they'd be willing to. Saleh, who needs a job, might be.
Liam Cohen's approach. He's taking more of a Ben Johnson approach, where it's like, I'm not going to rush into a head coaching job if I don't want one. If there's not a great opportunity there, and I don't think the Jags, where you're forced to deal with Trent Baalke, is a particularly great spot. So maybe that's true. And also, I think part of it is, and maybe this is also why Jerry Jones is interested. Saleh's not going to be the guy to push back on an overbearing owner, as we just saw with the Jets. He kind of let Woody do a lot of stuff, and there's only so much you could do in Robert Saleh's shoes. But I think Saleh's personality is a type that can handle a Jerry Jones or handle a Shad Khan, whereas a Mike Vrabel ain't dealing with Shad Khan if he doesn't want to. He's not dealing with Jerry Jones. I think Robert Saleh is someone.
He's dealing with Robert Kraft. As we post Brady, he's not looking like
I think Kraft is kind of taking a more hands-off approach with Mike Vrabel and going to kind of let him run the show. Obviously, he also doesn't really. He has Elliott Wolf as GM. Wolf does not have normal say for a general manager. That is a lot of Vrabel going to be running the show. So I think that makes sense for Saleh. I still think it's better off for him not to take a head coach job, but it is very interesting that he's getting all this recognition. And my takeaway is that he has Jeff Ulbrich to thank for that. It's Ulbrich being the ultimate wingman right now.
Well, the thing, though, when you're saying Saleh needs to take a year off, I get that, but these are some I think Jacksonville and Dallas are specifically really good jobs for any coach, because Jacksonville, you got your quarterback, you got two really good pass catchers, Thomas and Evan Engram. Weak division, Florida, no state tax, more money. Ownership will always spend money in free agency. If you and I don't know how much longer Baalke's honestly going to be there. He's talked about retiring in the past. I don't know. It's a fluid situation, but I don't know if you're necessarily tied to him. I think there's a way you could wiggle out of that. I don't think that's a terrible opening. And Dallas, by definition, are always going to chase stars to try to win. It's just baked into their DNA. Job security, they're very patient. Quarterback is set, emphatically set, Dak. Good receivers. Defense is pretty good. It's not like he's working with when he got to the Jets with how bad that defense was. Bless Austin starting. He's not working with that. That's an appealing job. And if you turn it down and go, I'm going to go be the Bengals defensive coordinator, and then next year there's a bunch of tire fire head coaching jobs, because he's not going to get into, I think, another Jets job where he goes to a team just at the complete bottom with nothing. Because that's what attracted him, I think, to the Jets, was I could build this up from scratch. I don't think he has that in him anymore. I think if he goes to another head coaching job, it's got to be a spot where he can compete for the playoffs immediately and often. And I don't know how many of those jobs open every year. And I think even though Jacksonville was bad this year, I think that's because Lawrence got hurt. I think if he's healthy, they have kind of a playoff shot in that division. I think it'd be silly for them to turn that down.
I don't think I'm not saying he should turn the jobs down. I just think it's better for him to not be a head coach immediately. But I understand if you have an appealing head coach job right in front of you and they're offering you the position, you can't say no to that. You're not going to be like, I'll just do it next year. You might not have next year. Who knows? I just think in a perfect world, it'd probably be better for him not to be a head coach immediately. But yeah, if he's offered the job, take it. Take it, buddy. I'd be happy for him.
Brian Sternbeck, the Jets did Saleh a huge favor by letting him leave before the ship
100%.
sank.
Shit really went down after that firing. That was kind of the interest.
He kept so much of it together, man. We didn't give him enough credit for that.
That's when all the leaks started coming out. Everyone kind of just threw their hands up and said, well, I guess we give up. We're done with this season. So, yeah, they
immediately. One of the biggest overreactions in recent sports history is Woody Johnson basically saying this entire thing was screwed 4 games in because they lost by 1 point to Denver.
And then lost to a Minnesota team by 1 score. A Minnesota team that won 14 games.
By 20 yards? Mike Williams fell down?
And missed the pick, yeah. And they lost.
Yeah, Mike Williams falling down cost them 2 games.
What a weird anecdote. And then they lost to a healthy San Francisco 49ers team. It's not bad losses. Not bad losses by any means. Let's really talk. Let's talk our last.
But really quick though, I want to get into Joe Grana's. He has a whole plan here. So Lance Newmark, GM, okay. Spielman, president of football operations. Okay, so 1-2 there. Aaron Glenn, head coach. Josh McCown, assistant head coach / quarterback coach. John Morton, who's in Denver right now. I love John Morton,
OC shout. I think we've mentioned him on the show before too.
Yep. And then veteran defensive coordinator and O-line coaches. So I guess maybe Dennis Allen or something like that.
I don't think he would take that. Why does he have any incentive?
Why would he? That's basically the same. I get assistant head coach. I think he would take OC.
But he'd probably follow Flores, assuming Flores gets a job somewhere else. Maybe he doesn't. If Flores doesn't get a job elsewhere, maybe he doesn't. But if Flores gets a job, he's probably going to follow him. Why would he? What does he have? He has no connection with Glenn, But I like the idea. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's not a bet that they could do much worse than that, which means they're probably going to do much worse than that. Yeah, I would
sign up for all that. I don't know the Spielman Newmark connection. I don't know if there is one there, but other than the Jets have just interviewed both of them.
Just like both of them.
But yeah, John Morton is an OC. We've talked about it before. That 2017 year with Josh McCown. That was low key one of the best offensive coordinator jobs the Jets have had in the last 15 years, which is crazy to say. But it's true. So I would have no issues.
And then they fired him. Why did they fire him?
That was who did they bring in after that again? That was 2020. Jeremy Bates. That's right. Wasn't there a thing with Jeremy Bates like he was climbing a mountain? Didn't he climb like Mount Kilimanjaro or something? Or am I making that up? Why do I have a weird? I don't know why I have that. Hold on.
How would you know that and B
maybe? Well, Mountain of the Dead is a book by Jeremy Bates. That's not what I'm looking for. Shut up. Yeah, he did.
I'm just looking at his resume. It's one of the most pathetic resumes I've ever seen, and they hired him as an OC.
He walked a 3,000-mile trail. Why do I remember that? I don't know why I remember that. But anyway, Jeremy Bates is a crazy pull. I totally forgot about him. Why did the Jets hire him when they did, too?
That's a pathetic resume.
He had no history, but the Jets brought him back as their QB coach under Bowles in 2017, and he had not been in the league in 4 years.
That's just it's the same thing with Saleh. He just didn't know. He just didn't know offense. He knew offense when he hired LaFleur, and then what do you know? Meddling owner. We got to fire somebody. Our first ever podcast. Maybe don't fire Mike LaFleur. The next day, Mike LaFleur fired. How's Mike LaFleur doing? He's an OC with the Rams. He's doing great. He probably is going to get an OC job.
Yeah. Morton connection makes sense because Morton crossed paths with Glenn both in New Orleans and Detroit, only for 1 year at a time. But Morton was the wide receivers coach in New Orleans in 2016, and then he was a senior offensive assistant in Detroit in 2022. So I like the connection; it makes sense. I'd be all for it.
Are you on board with Sam Darnold coming back? Because Sam Darnold's value, you talk about just cratering. I mean, people were talking about $50 million a year 2 weeks ago. And now it's, will he maybe get 40? Because of those last 2 games. One against Aaron Glenn and one against Sean McVay. Looking at him, obviously in a vacuum, he's never going to come back to the Jets. Just because the Jets. But in a vacuum.
Would I want it?
I feel like he'd be an okay fit. Because with what happened with Russell Wilson, I don't think he comes back. I think Russell Wilson still comes back. I don't think Justin Fields goes back to the Steelers. but I think it's more likely that Justin Fields goes back to the Steelers because they kind of saw the limits of what Russ is right now. I don't know where Kirk Cousins is. I don't envy like trading for Will Levis or something like that. The options are thin. Good team. Baker Mayfield-y contract. New offense. Aaron Glenn is your coach. Probably better offensive staff. And you could do worse. You could do worse.
Yeah, I think it'd be a similar signing to Justin Fields, as we've talked about.
The Fields is not getting the same
like in the
money,
sense of like, hey, I don't know if this guy is the solution, but there's a chance he is, and we might as well take that chance because we're not drafting a quarterback this year. Again, I don't think it's going to happen. It all depends on what his contract ends up looking like. It does seem like he's cost himself a lot of money. I don't think he gets a long-term deal anywhere. Maybe we're talking a 3-year deal max for him in free agency, and probably more so like a 2-year deal at this point, where it's like a 2-year, a lot of guarantees, kind of come in and prove that it wasn't a fluke. The issues that I have with Darnold, right? Like, and I put a good thread about this yesterday or 2 days ago on Twitter after that last game. And I hate using the word like exposed with him, but I think we saw a lot of those weaknesses that he still has were on display over the last couple of weeks. And I forget if it was you that said this. It was a good quote I saw where it's like, and this is it's a very common quote where coaching quarterbacks win games in the regular season, coaching wins games in the regular season, quarterbacks win games in the postseason. I think Kevin O'Connell has done a fantastic job with Sam Darnold constructing an offense that maximizes his strengths and masks his weaknesses. Sam Darnold is an incredibly physically and physically gifted quarterback. He has a rocket arm, great mobility, really, really, really talented quarterback. There's a reason he went 3rd overall and probably should have gone 1st overall that year. At least that was the expectation going into that draft. We know that about him. The issues with his game, as we've seen, his pocket presence is a mess. His decision-making, especially when he's pressured, is also a mess. And he compounds those mistakes by snowballing everything. And that is something that we remember vividly from his time with the Jets. When things start to go south, Sam Darnold folds. Like he consistently compounds those mistakes with more mistakes. The good thing is with Kevin O'Connell's offense, he hasn't been asked to do a lot he hasn't been asked to make a lot of complicated reads. He's not really forced into obvious passing situations. They have a good running game that they've been able to lean on. The offensive line has not been terrible for most of the year. And when in doubt, he chucks up a 50-50 ball to Justin Jefferson, and that works 80% of the time because it's Justin Jefferson.
And the Jets won't have, they'll have Garrett Wilson, but
that offense has been able to work for Sam Darnold, and he's been able to thrive in it because when you give him that kind of a situation, he's going to do really well because he's very talented and he's very gifted. Unfortunately, when the game plan gets blown up and Sam Darnold's asked to now make complicated reads and you have to work outside of the structure of the offense and maybe the pressure situation, the pressure's getting you a little bit, it snowballs. And we've seen that with Sam Darnold, unfortunately, a lot over the last few years. And now we saw that over the last two games, Sam Darnold, he completed like 40-something% of his passes in that last game against Detroit. And then this past week was also very bad against the Rams, of course, in the wild card game. I think I saw a stat where it was like, I forget the number, but it was like the vast majority of the pressures that the Vikings allowed in that game were after 2.5 seconds and were a result of Darnold just holding onto the ball forever. I don't know if you saw the clip that's going viral where it was Paul Allen, who's the Vikings play-by-play guy. It was a play where Darnold got sacked in the third quarter, and Darnold was holding on the ball forever and just evading rushers until he finally gets sacked. And Scott Allen is literally screaming on the play-by-play on radio, "Get rid of the ball. Stop holding the damn ball. Throw it." That's what it's like watching Sam Darnold sometimes. And it's very frustrating.
Paul Allen is the best because people always talk about when Brett Favre was that pick. This isn't Detroit. This is the Super Bowl. People always talk about that.
Yeah.
When they were playing against Josh McCown and the Cardinals, and if the Cardinals won, the Vikings weren't in the playoffs. It was like a 4th and 20 with 3 seconds left. And he trucks it into the end zone. Cardinals catch it and they win, and the Vikings are out. No, no, just screaming just like a movie. He's just looking up at the sky.
He's great.
Oh, it's so great.
He's called the Minneapolis.
Bob Wischusen's good, but he can't do that.
His call the Minneapolis Miracle is also amazing.
This is not Detroit, man. I just love that.
Darnold has grown in that offense, and I don't want to make it seem like Sam Darnold has just been a complete product of Kevin O'Connell this year, because that's not. It's never black and white like that. It's always the shades of gray. He's grown in an offense, and I think he's made some strides. but he's still Sam Darnold. He's still making the same mistakes that he made in New York and he made in Carolina as well. And because of that, I'd have a lot of hesitancy giving him any kind of guaranteed money or any, sort of long-term guaranteed contract, because I think if he leaves that system, he is destined for regression. And I said that about Baker Mayfield. I said that once Dave Canales was gone, he's going to regress. I said that going into the year, and I was very wrong. Maybe because Liam Cohen is been also done a great job in Tampa, but also Baker, I think, has grown a lot as a quarterback. Darnold, while I think he's grown, I think the offense that he was in,
Baker was better just floor-wise anyway.
He was. I think Darnold, the offense he was in was perfectly made to highlight his strengths and mask his weaknesses. And I think if you put him in a different offense, those weaknesses will probably be more prevalent. So I would have a lot of concerns about that. But if the Jets wanted to take a chance on him, sure. I don't think he'd want to come back here. I think he's probably going to – maybe he goes to the Giants or something. That'd be hilarious. I could see that happening.
I think that I was going to say the Titans if they didn't get the number 1 pick.
Yeah.
But they did, so I don't think they're going to pass that.
They're probably taking Cam Ward or, a quarterback there. But yeah, I don't know what this means for his NFL future. I wish him all the best. I want Sam Darnold to succeed. I'm just saying this is the stuff that I still see on tape, that it's the same stuff he was doing in New York. Like if you copy pasted those last 2 Darnold games, like that looks exactly like the quarterback we saw at the Jets. And it's not just the offensive line. Like I hate it. I hate that the takeaway from that game was, Darnold was sacked 7 times. His offensive line stinks. They weren't great.
9 times, Justin.
9 times. Oh my God, 9 times by the end of that game. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. He almost got 10 and he got away from it at the end.
I don't think there was a really good stat. I think it was Brett Coleman tweeted it out. I'll try and pull it up. But basically, the skinny of it was that the offensive line had a below average game, like in terms of pressures allowed and allowing quick pressures. Darnold was just unbelievably abysmal at turning those pressures into sacks. Here it was. It was 11 of those 24 pressures that the Vikings allowed were under 2.5 seconds. 13 of them. 13 pressures allowed were over 2.5 seconds. That's absurd. Like that is completely ridiculous. And that is a Sam Darnold stat. That is a quarterback stat. That's why sacks and pressures can be misleading sometimes. 11 pressures allowed under 2.5 seconds isn't great. That's a below average day by an offensive line. 13 pressures, more than half of those pressures allowed being over 2.5 seconds, is directly indicative of Sam Darnold just holding onto the ball forever and not getting rid of it.
And with that, we're going to go and call time on this episode of the Jet Press Podcast. Justin, any final thoughts as we wait for GM news, possibly Aaron Glenn news, which might take a while if the Lions keep winning, but seems like we're finally making some progress after 33 interviews.
I think we are making some progress, and I think by next time when we're doing our Wednesday show next week, the Jets will have a general manager. I will predict that right now. And like I said, my prediction is Mike Borgonzi and Aaron Glenn. That's going to be my prediction. Also, right now, it is live as of 13 minutes ago. We got a late start. We also went pretty long. But as of 13 minutes ago, my interview with Thomas Morstead, with Jets punter Thomas Morstead, is live on the Jet Press YouTube channel. Be sure to check that out. We talked to him about the Robert Saleh firing and everything that kind of went down with that, his reaction and what the locker room reaction was. We talked about Aaron Rodgers and what his future might be. I asked him some really interesting insight on Greg Zuerlein and what might have happened there and why the kicker position is so volatile. It's a really interesting discussion. That interview is live on the Jet Press YouTube channel right now, so be sure to check that out. Mike, I will ask you, give me your prediction right now. I think you said it before, and I already forgot what you said. What is your prediction? If you had to predict right now, Jets head coach GM, who do you think it's going to be?
Aaron Glenn, Chris Spielman.
Chris Spielman, really? Oh, boy. They're going to get – if they hire Chris Spielman.
Hey, Woody, my brother's really good. My brother's really – but again, I think he is a really smart guy. In fact, you could look this up. I think – because he actually retired from the NFL early with a lot left because his wife unfortunately got sick. Cancer, I think.
Damn.
But I believe the year after that, he interviewed for the Ohio State head coaching job and was like the number 2 finalist. Like, people love this guy.
Yeah.
And I could see him being a good GM in the same way John Lynch was.
Maybe. We'll have a better idea once they start bringing in guys for a second round of interviews. As Brian said in chat, Morstead is 22nd all-time in punt yardage. If he comes back next year, he's got a shot to get as high as 18th. Yeah, he's played 255 career games. We talked about this in the interview. I believe he's like 60th or 70th all-time in the NFL. And he will continue climbing up those ranks, which is it's very, very impressive.
He's chasing Jeff Fiegel's legacy.
Yes, he is. But until next time, thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Mike on Twitter at @ByMikeLuciano. Follow me on Twitter at Justin T. Fried. Follow Jet Press at the Jet Press. Download the Jet Press podcast wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, like, hit the notification bell. You guys know what to do. You could also become a member today, as Mike mentioned at the top of the show. It is 99 cents. You get your comments prioritized in chat, and it's a great way to help support the show. We much appreciate everybody who becomes a member, who is watching, all that stuff, as you know. We stream live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for listening to Jet Press Podcast. I've been Justin Fried. That's Mike Luciano. See you guys next time.
See you folks next week.